Hi there guys, welcome to another video of us solving a practice test together. This time we're going to solve the Alva Labs Logic Test, which is a particularly challenging cognitive assessment. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction of the test, the time frame, the basic rules, etc. If you are already familiar with these rules, feel free to skip ahead. Then we're going to go over the 5+1 basic patterns, which is basically my attempt in giving you a methodical process to solving these questions, dissecting them to their basic components, and what I hope is going to give you a way to solve these questions more efficiently and much more quickly in the actual assessment. Then we're going to move on to 10 practice questions, which are going to be the majority of this video, and I'm going to stop around the middle to talk 2 minutes about preparation if that interests you. Okay, so let's start with a basic introduction of the Alva Labs Logic Test. Again, if you are familiar with these rules, feel free to skip ahead. The test contains 20 questions, each of which is structured as a 3x3 matrix that has one missing shape in the bottom right corner. The shapes in both the rows and the columns follow certain patterns. These are not necessarily the same patterns. In some questions, one of these, either the rows or the columns, is going to be enough in order to solve the question. Naturally, you need to decide which shape of the 6 answer options completes the matrix according to the given rules and patterns. But especially in the more advanced questions of the test, you are going to need to solve both patterns in order to be able to find the right answer. Okay, you're going to have a time limit of 2 minutes per question, which is going to be pretty easy in the first couple of questions, but much more challenging towards the end of the test. This test is adaptive, which means that it grows in difficulty as you progress through it, given that you answer the questions correctly. If you answer the question correctly, the next question will be more challenging, and if you answer the question incorrectly, the next question is going to be simpler. So in this practice test, I am going to do just that. The questions are going to be increasingly more challenging as we go through the practice test. I'm not going to waste your time by showing very simple questions in which the patterns are very evident. I'm going to start with rather intermediate level questions and move ahead to more and more challenging questions as we progress. Okay, so we're going to start with a 5+1 patterns. What I see in the Alva Labs Logic Test, as well as in other similar tests like the Raven APM or the Matrigma test, is that most questions are a combination of simple patterns, and this combination across the rows and or the columns is what makes them more complex. The more patterns there are to a certain row or column, and the more variety of these patterns and rules, the more challenging the question is going to be. But eventually, at the end of the day, you're going to be able to dissect nearly every problem to a number of basic patterns, and if you look at them separately, it's going to be much simpler for you. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I'm going to try and give you more of a process, a method to take these matrices and dissect them into the rows and columns, into the various basic patterns of each. And I believe that this is going to be much more helpful in identifying and applying these patterns and rules much faster and much more efficiently in the actual assessment. Okay, so the 5 basic patterns are rotation, motion, progression, construction, and frequency. These are more common. The last pattern, which is condition, is less common than the previous 5. That's why I call it the 5+1 patterns. And it is also considered a more challenging pattern and will appear in the more advanced questions of this test. Okay, so let's go over these basic patterns. The first is rotation. As we can see here, the triangle rotates 90 degrees counterclockwise with each step. This pattern is going to be characterized by an angle and a direction. Okay, so angle it can be any number, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and direction is most commonly either clockwise or counterclockwise, and the rotation can be either constant or changing. Okay, it can change both in direction, which is less common, but also may sometimes happen. What is more common is the changing of the angle. So the first rotation would be 45 degrees, then 90 degrees, then 180 degrees, etc. The second pattern is motion, which is pretty simple to understand. The objects change their position, and here too, similar to the rotation pattern, the movement can be either constant, meaning that it moves the same, so to speak, distance with every step, or it can change. It can increase, it can decrease, and we're going to see examples of that in the questions. Okay, so the next pattern is progression, and it's the most versatile pattern of all of them. That's because it contains pretty much any pattern that cannot be included in the other 5 options. Common examples are change of color, as can be seen in the first row, the number of shapes, as we can see in the second, and the number of shape sides, as we can see in the third. We're also going to see several such examples in the practice test itself. The next pattern is construction, in which 2 elements in a row or a column create the third. In this example, you can see a very simple one, where the square plus the circle equals the last shape. It can get more complex than that, and we're going to see such examples in the practice test. The last of the basic 5 patterns is a frequency, basically defined by the order and frequency of the objects across either the rows, the columns, or the entire matrix. Okay, you can see here that we have each row and each column contains 1 square, 1 triangle, and 1 circle, and therefore it is clear that the missing shape is going to be a square in that case. Again, a very basic example, and we're going to see much more complex examples in the practice. Okay, the last pattern is condition, in which the change of the shape is going to depend on certain conditions. As I mentioned, this is a more challenging pattern that is going to appear less commonly than the previous 5, but you should be familiar with it nonetheless. In this example, we can see here, if the 2 first shapes have the points the dots inside the square, then we're going to sum them. Okay, we have 1 plus 1 equals 2. However, if they're on different sides of the square, here we have 2 inside and 1 outside, we're going to subtract them. Okay, so here we have, let's say, look at this column. We have 1 plus 2 equals 3. 1 minus 1 equals 0. So that means that the last shape, the missing shape, is going to also have 3 dots inside the square. Okay, now we're going to move on to the actual questions themselves. We're going to have 10 questions. Each time I'm going to ask you to look at the question, pause the video, try it for yourself, and then we're going to move forward to solving it. Okay, so go ahead, try to solve this first question, and we're going to move ahead to the solution. Okay, so the answer to this question is answer number 6, and we're going to show why. The basic pattern in this question is construction, and it is the same pattern across both the rows and columns. Let's start with the rows. Take the first row, for example. We have the leftmost shape and the middle shape. When combined together, they create the rightmost shape. Okay, and the same goes for the columns as well. If we take the first 2 shapes and combine them together, construct them into a single shape, then we get the shape at the bottom. And again, we can look at the rightmost column and the bottommost row to combine 2 previous shapes, and we get answer number 6. Okay, so this is a very basic example of a construction question. If you are not familiar with this pattern, if this is the first time you witness it, you're going to find it very difficult to identify that pattern in the actual test. So that is why it's very important to experience and practice with various types of patterns beforehand. Okay, question number 2. Okay, take a moment to look at this one as well, and we're going to move ahead and solve it. Okay, so the correct answer in this case is number 1. And this is also a case of a construction pattern across both the rows and the columns, but this time it is more complex than the previous one we've seen. It's called a XOR, which basically means that we're going to take the elements that these 2 first shapes do not share. Okay, so if we take, for instance, the second row, the elements that these two shapes do not have in common are this middle line, this side line, and the dot in the middle, okay? And if we combine them into a single shape, this is going to yield the rightmost shape, which is this one. And this is the same pattern across each and every row and each and every column as well, and you can see it for yourself. So if we take a look at the rightmost row and the bottommost, the rightmost column and the bottommost row, then we're going to see that the correct answer is number 1. Okay, moving on to question number 3. Again, pause the video, take a look at it yourself, and we're going to move ahead and solve it. Okay, so the correct answer here is 2, and this is probably a more intuitive question for you. You might have been able to solve it more easily than you have the previous 2, but in terms of patterns, it is, I would say, a more challenging one, but because it combines 2 different patterns. Okay, and I'm going to show you them now. The first pattern is across the rows, and it is the progression, as you can see, the progression of the color. Okay. The color grows progressively more dark as we move across the rows, and the pattern across the columns is frequency. Okay, we have 1 circle, 2 circles, and 3 circles. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is distractors. The distractors are basically things that are included in the shape and have no specific patterns and are only there to confuse you. Okay, so in this case, we have the dot in the middle, which is in all instances. And that may be clear, but the second one that you might have tried figuring out is the slope. Okay, and this slope is completely random, and this is intentional. There's not going to be any rule applied to the slope, and you should be able to weed out these distractors and not to obsess over them. Okay, so again, if we take the patterns that we've seen in the rows and columns and apply them to the rightmost column, the bottommost row, we're going to see that the correct answer is indeed number 2. Okay, so question number 4, this one's also going to be more advanced than we've seen before. Take a moment to look at it, and we're going to move ahead to the solution. Okay, so the correct answer here is answer number 5. We have 3 different patterns, 2 of them across the rows. The rows combine 2 different patterns, progression and motion, and a different type of progression across the columns. Okay, so we're going to start with the rows. We have the first shape has 3 sides, then a rectangle with 4 sides, then 5 sides. So this is the progression in terms of the rows. Each and every step, the shape's number of sides grows by 1. And this is also the case in the 2 other rows. The second pattern is motion, and that is the motion of the dot. Okay, as you can see, if we look, for instance, on the second row, at the leftmost shape, it's at the very bottom, then it moves up, then it moves up again. The pattern across the columns is a different type of progression, which is the number of the dots. Okay, we have 0 in the first, 1 in the second, and 2 in the third. So this means that the last shape here is going to have 6 sides, it's going to have 2 dots, and they're going to be at the top part of the shape, so answer number 5. Okay, question number 5, again, pause the video, try to solve it for yourself, and we'll move ahead to the solution. Okay, so the correct answer here is answer number 3, and the patterns here are motion across the rows, rotation across the columns, plus a little trick that I'm going to discuss with you in a minute. Okay, so across the rows, we can see that the movement pattern is that of the black triangle, which moves 1 step to the right with each step. If you look at the first line, you can see that it moves from the rightmost cell here to the first. Okay, so this is also a very common pattern where there's a motion pattern. Sometimes it's going, if it moves, say, outside of the shape, then it's going to disappear. Sometimes it's going to come back from the other side, as we see here. These are all sorts of motion patterns that you should be familiar with. And the next pattern is across the columns. It is rotation. the rotation of the arrow. Okay, so this is the trick I want to talk to you about. In this case, you can see the arrow rotating 90 degrees counterclockwise with each step. And when it is parallel to the rectangle, then it's basically completely hidden behind it. It's a rather common trope, you could say, in these types of questions. So answer number 3 is the combination of patterns from both the rows and the columns. Okay, now after we've solved 5 questions and reached around the middle of this video, I'm going to take a minute of your time to talk about preparation if that interests you. If not, feel free to move ahead. I personally think that it is essential that you practice for the Alva Labs Logic Test, because how much practice it requires to dissect the problem and to look at each part of it separately. Okay, so as always in nearly all of my videos and posts, I strongly recommend Job Test Prep's preparation pack, practice tests that are fully tailored to the actual assessment in terms of the appearance, in terms of the use patterns, in terms of the given answer options, in terms of timing. And you're also going to get guides, both interactive guides and a full-length PDF guide to walk you through the basic patterns. This really is an excellent preparation in my view, and you can find the links in the description to purchase this assessment if that interests you. Again, I strongly recommend that you do. And that's it. And let's move on to the next question, question number 6. Okay, so again, take a minute to look at this question and we're going to move ahead and solve it. Okay, so the correct answer for this question is answer number 1. And the patterns that this question presents is, again, also construction patterns. But the reason that this question is more challenging than the previous construction questions that we have seen is that each pattern takes only certain parts of the shapes into account. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's start with the rows. In the rows, only the dots follow the construction pattern. Okay, we take the left dot from the leftmost shape, the right dot from the middle shape, and we combine them into the 2 dots on the rightmost shape. In the columns, it is the other way around. Okay, the lines are the ones that follow the construction patterns. We take the 2 lines from the top, the middle line from the middle, and then we have a construction of 3 lines in the bottom shape. So this is a question in which you're going to have to identify the different patterns of both the rows and the columns in order to be able to solve the question. And that would yield answer number 1 as the final answer. Okay, question number 7. Okay, we're moving forward to some more and more advanced questions. Again, take a moment, pause the video, try to solve it, and we're going to move ahead. Right, so the correct answer in this question is number 3. And again, we have a rather complex combination of patterns here with rotation and progression in the rows and a different progression pattern in the columns. We're going to start with a rotation pattern across the rows, which is naturally the rotation of the arrow. If you remember what I said in the beginning of this video, that the rotation can change with steps, right? So this is a very good example. We start with 45 degrees rotation in the first step, then 90 degrees rotation clockwise in the second step. And the same goes for the second row as well, right? So we start with a 90 degrees rotation in the first step, then 180 degrees in the second. And if you look at the third row, you're going to see that we start with a 180 degrees rotation, which means that the second step is going to be 360 degrees rotation, which yields the exact same arrow. So either answer 3 or 5 are going to be the correct answers based only on this pattern, but we're going to need and find other patterns both across the rows and the columns in order to be able to solve this question. Okay, so moving on to the progression pattern across the rows, this is the white dots. With every step, the number of white dots increases by 1. We start with 1 dot in the leftmost shape, 2 in the middle one, and 3 in the rightmost one. And if you have already identified it yourself, that the progression pattern across the columns are the black dots. Okay, we have one black dot in the top shape, two black dots in the middle one, and three black dots in the bottom one. And this means that the correct answer is number 3, as it contains 3 white dots and 3 black dots, and the rotation of the arrow is correct. Okay, I've previously talked about distractors, and here probably the most major distractor is the location of the dots. As you can see, it is completely random. They move all over the place, and this is also used mostly to confuse and distract you from the actual answer. Okay, so answer number 3 is the correct one for this question. Okay, question number 8. Take a moment to look at it, pause the video, and we'll move ahead to the solution. Okay, so the correct answer here is answer number 4, and this question relies on a certain number of shapes that move around inside the square. So you might have identified that this question follows the motion patterns across both the rows and the columns, but then we're going to dissect it and analyze it based on smaller parts of the question. Okay, so the circle moves one step clockwise with each step. It starts on the left side, in the middle of the left side of the square, then it moves to the top, then to the right. Okay, similarly, the triangle also moves one such step. While it starts in the corner, it moves then to the top corner to the left. So this is a counterclockwise rotation. And the cross in these steps take only half a step counterclockwise. It moves from the corner to the middle, then to the opposite corner, and so forth. Okay. If we look across the columns, we see similar yet different patterns. Okay, the circle this time moves half a step clockwise from the middle of the left side to the corner to the middle of the top side. The triangle moves half a step counterclockwise from the top to the middle, from the bottom to the middle to the top. Okay, and the cross this time takes a full one step counterclockwise. Okay, so the main challenge here is the constant shifting and movement of all these different elements, and I would recommend focusing on one each and every time across the rows or across the columns. And the main thing that you're going to need to practice here is to identify them as fast as you can, because again, you have only 2 minutes to solve each question. So the more patterns that you see, the more practice you get, you're going to identify these faster and achieve a higher score. Okay, so combining the information we have, and you can see it for yourself, all these movements across both the rows and the columns, you can see that answer 4 is the correct one. Okay, question number 9. We're getting to a really advanced question here, in my opinion. Pause the video, try to solve it, take your time, and we'll move ahead to the solution. Right, so the correct answer here is answer number 6. In this case, we have construction patterns and we have a condition, which makes this particular question extra challenging. And let's try and dissect this question into its components and solve them one at a time. Okay, so we're going to start with the rows, and the rows take into account only the horizontal line. Okay, we're going to look at the total number of dots above and below the line. Okay, we have 4 dots above the line, 1 dot below the line, and therefore we're going to subtract them. That is basically the pattern here, and that yields us 3 dots above the line. In the second row, similarly, we have 5 dots below the line, 3 dots above the line, and that yields us a total of 2 points below the line. As you can see, the locations of the points are completely random, okay, other than below or above the line. This is again a distractor that the test is going to use in order to confuse you. All you have to look at here in this particular question is the number of the dots below and above the horizontal line. And this means that if we look at the third row, then we have 3 dots in above the horizontal line, two dots beneath it. So the final answer is going to have 1 dot above the horizontal line, which is either 1 or 6. Okay, now we're going to move on to the pattern of the columns in order to determine which of these two answers is the correct one. Okay, so looking at the columns, you might have figured out, if you've seen the explanation for the rows, that this time we're going to look at the vertical line and do the exact same process. Okay, so 5 dots to the right of the line, 3 dots to the left of the line, that yields 2 dots to the right. And again, looking at the third column, we have a total of 3 dots right of the line, 2 dots to the left of the line. So that means a total of 1 point after subtracting 1 dot right of the vertical line. So combining what we know, 1 dot above the horizontal line and to the right of the vertical line, this means that the correct answer is answer number 6. And I hope this question has shown you the true complexity of these questions and how challenging they can actually get. Okay, one final last question. This is, in my opinion, likely the most challenging question in this entire practice test. Take a moment, pause the video, think it through, and we're going to move on to solving the question. Right, so the correct answer in this case is answer number 4, and the patterns here in this question are 2 different frequency patterns across the rows and the columns, and we're now going to start looking at them one by one. So we're going to start with the rows, and we'll see that we have 6 horizontal elements in each row, okay? Not differentiating between thick lines, thin lines, or crescents. Each row contains exactly 6 horizontal elements and 6 vertical elements as well, okay? So that means that if we look at the third row, to complete the count to 6 of each, we're going to have 2 vertical elements and 3 horizontal ones. Okay, so this means that based on the pattern we've seen from the rows, the correct answer can be either 2, 3, or 4. Okay, now again, we're going to move to identify the pattern across the columns in order to solve the question. Okay, so if we look at the columns, we see a different frequency pattern. Okay, this time we're talking about 4 appearances of each element. Okay, so we have, looking at the crescents, we have 4 crescents in each column. We also have 4 thin lines and 4 thick lines, okay, for each column. Again, we're looking only at the column this time. And again, looking at the rightmost column, this means that if we need to complete to 4 instances of each element, then we're going to have no crescents. We're going to have 2 thin lines and 3 thick lines, okay? Based on this information, the correct answer can be either 1 or 4, okay? And again, combining information from both the rows and the columns, we reach the conclusion that the correct answer is number 4. Okay guys, we're done. 10 sample questions of the Alva Labs Logic Test solved. If you found this video helpful and interesting, please consider sharing and subscribing. It really does go a long way in helping me to keep creating this content for you and other candidates like yourself. Again, I hope you've learned from the video. Good luck, and see you next time.